You're sitting in a cramped office, balancing two spreadsheets that don't agree with each other when the first message comes in. It isn't unusual for people to argue over numbers. It is unusual for someone to attach a location, a deadline, and a photo of a man tied to a chair with a timestamp already counting down. You assume it's a scam at first. You've seen enough fake threats to recognize the pattern. But then you notice the transaction ID referenced in the message. It matches one of yours. A transfer you flagged 2 hours ago for irregular routing, a small amount by your standards, but it moved through too many hands too quickly. You check the logs again. The transfer originates from a shell company you've audited before. Clean on paper, messy in reality. You were supposed to escalate it. You didn't. You marked it for review and moved on to something easier. The second message arrives before you can decide what to do. The same photo, a new timestamp, 10 minutes gone. A single sentence. You delayed us. You don't call the police. You don't even consider it for long. Instead, you pull up every record connected to that transaction and start tracing. The money jumps accounts across 3 countries in under a minute, fragments into smaller amounts, recombines into a wallet you don't recognize, and then disappears into a network you've only heard rumors about. You know enough to understand that you are now part of a chain you don't control. The third message contains instructions. You are to correct the delay, you are to move a replacement sum double the original through a specific sequence of accounts within an hour. If you fail, the countdown reaches 0. You stare at the numbers. The amount is larger than anything you are authorized to move. You would need to break rules, override safeguards, leave a trail that would end your career if anyone looked closely. You start doing it anyway. Every decision comes faster than the last. You reroute funds from dormant accounts, justify it as temporary balancing, exploit permissions you were never supposed to use alone. You tell yourself you'll fix it later, that you'll unwind everything once the immediate crisis passes. The numbers line up just enough to move. You send the transfer. You wait. No message comes for a minute. Then 2. Then 5. You think maybe it worked, maybe the photo was staged, maybe this was all a test you somehow passed. Then your phone rings. The voice on the other end doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't need to. It tells you the man in the chair is alive. It tells you your correction was acceptable. It tells you that your ability to act quickly under pressure is now noted. Then it asks you a question you don't know how to answer. Do you want to keep your job, or do you want to understand what your job really is? You don't respond immediately. You try to think of a third option. There isn't one. The voice continues, explaining that what you did in the last hour is more valuable than anything you've done in your entire career, that you've proven you can move money when it matters, that there are people who need that ability, that there are consequences for refusing. You think about the man in the chair. You think about how easily you broke your own rules. You think about how much of your system you already compromised. You say yes. By the next morning, your access has changed. New permissions appear without explanation. Old restrictions vanish. Accounts you've never seen before become visible, each one holding sums that don't make sense, tied to entities that don't exist. You are given a list of transactions to execute, each one more complex than the last. No explanations, only outcomes. Move this here, split that there. Ensure this arrives by a specific time. You begin to understand the scale within a week. These aren't random transfers. They are coordinated. They follow patterns that correspond to events you start seeing in the news. A shipment intercepted here, a conflict escalating there, a sudden shift in power somewhere you've never been. Every time, the money moved first. You realize that you are not just moving funds, you are enabling outcomes. The first time you try to push back, it is subtle. You delay a transaction for a few minutes, telling yourself it won't matter. The response is immediate. A message arrives with a new photo. Different man, same chair, same countdown. You complete the transfer without further hesitation. You stop testing boundaries after that. Weeks turn into months. You become faster, more precise. You stop needing instructions for every step. You start anticipating what will be required based on patterns you've learned. When a new request comes in, you already know the routing paths, the accounts to use, the timing that minimizes detection. You build systems within the system, layers of redundancy that ensure nothing fails because of a single point of weakness. You tell yourself you are just optimizing processes. You avoid thinking about what those processes support. Then one day, the voice calls again, not with instructions, but with a proposition. You have been effective, it says, reliable. There is an opportunity to expand your role, to move from execution to control. You understand what that means before it's fully explained. You would no longer just follow orders. You would design the flows, decide which networks to use, which intermediaries to trust, which risks to take. You would coordinate multiple operations at once. You would be responsible for outcomes, not just transactions. You ask what happens if you refuse. The voice doesn't answer directly. It doesn't need to. You've seen enough to know. You accept. The transition is immediate. You are given access to a broader network, a map of connections that stretches across jurisdictions, industries, and identities. Shell companies nested within other shell companies, foundations that fund initiatives that don't exist, charities that act as fronts for movements you're not supposed to name. Every node is a piece of a system designed to move value without being seen. You begin by consolidating. Too many redundant paths create inefficiencies. Too many intermediaries increase risk. You identify overlaps, eliminate unnecessary layers, reroute flows through channels you trust. You reduce the time it takes to move funds from days to hours, from hours to minutes. With efficiency comes scale. Larger sums begin to move through your network. The requests you receive are no longer isolated, they are coordinated campaigns. Funds are distributed across multiple regions simultaneously, each transfer timed to align with others, creating cascading effects. A payment here triggers a shipment there, which triggers an action somewhere else. Every time, the money moved first. The first major decision you make on your own involves a conflict you've been tracking for weeks. Two sides, both funded through different channels within your network, both escalating. You realize that the flows you control could tilt the balance. You could accelerate one side, delay the other, create an advantage that might end the conflict sooner. You consider doing it. You tell yourself it would reduce overall harm, shorten the duration, limit the damage. Then you notice something in the data. Both sides are being funded by entities that ultimately trace back to the same origin. The conflict itself is part of a larger strategy, one that benefits from prolonging instability. Ending it quickly would disrupt other operations tied to it. You understand in that moment that you are not just a participant. You are a mechanism within a system that values outcomes differently than you do. You choose not to interfere. You maintain the flows as instructed. The conflict continues. Time passes differently now. You measure it in operations, not days. In completed transfers, not hours. You stop thinking about your old life because it no longer fits into the structure you operate within. Your responsibilities expand. You oversee teams you never meet, individuals who manage smaller segments of the network, each one dependent on the flows you design. You create rules for yourself, not moral ones, but operational. Never rely on a single route. Always have a fallback. Assume every channel is compromised eventually. Build systems that can adapt in real time. You create layers of encryption, obfuscation, and redundancy that make your network resilient against disruption. When a government agency begins to investigate anomalies in financial flows, you see it before anyone else. Patterns in their inquiries, small probes into accounts you recognize. You adjust routes, shift funds, create noise that lead them away from critical nodes. You feed them just enough to keep them occupied without revealing anything significant. You learn to think like your adversaries, to anticipate their moves, to stay ahead. But the system is not perfect. Nothing is. A mistake happens, not yours, but within your network.
A junior operator misroutes a transaction, exposing a link between two entities that were supposed to remain separate. The exposure triggers an investigation that moves faster than you expected. Accounts are frozen. Intermediaries are questioned. The risk of unraveling increases by the hour. You are given a choice. Contain the damage by isolating the compromised segment, which would require cutting off several nodes and abandoning assets worth millions, or attempt to salvage the network by rerouting around the exposure, which carries a higher risk of detection but maintains more of your structure. You analyze the options. Containment is safer in the short term but weakens your overall network. Salvage is riskier but maintains your capacity. You choose salvage.
You work continuously, adjusting flows in real time, redirecting funds through alternative paths, creating layers of transactions that obscure the original links. You coordinate with operators across multiple time zones, each one executing part of the plan. The system holds, barely. The investigation loses momentum, diverted by the complexity you've introduced. You succeed, the network survives. But the cost is not just financial. The junior operator responsible for the mistake disappears from your system. Their access is revoked, their accounts wiped clean. You don't ask what happened. You don't need to. You begin to understand that your role is not just about moving money. It's about maintaining a structure that tolerates no weakness. Years pass. You become the central node. Requests come to you not just for execution, but for strategy. You are consulted on operations that span continents, on decisions that influence conflicts you never see directly. You manage flows that fund groups, governments, and entities that operate in the shadows. You stop thinking of it as an underground economy. To you, it is simply the system. The moral tension never disappears. It evolves. It becomes less about individual decisions and more about the cumulative effect of everything you do. You know that the money you move enables actions that cause harm. You also know that stopping would not end those actions. It would simply shift control to someone else, someone less precise, less controlled. You justify your role by the stability you maintain, by the efficiency you've introduced, by the idea that you are preventing worse outcomes by keeping the system predictable. Then a new variable enters your calculations. A group you've never encountered before begins to disrupt your flows, not by attacking directly, but by introducing small, targeted inefficiencies, delays in transactions, minor discrepancies in accounts, subtle changes that compound over time. You recognize the pattern immediately. Someone is studying your system, learning its weaknesses. You initiate countermeasures. You isolate affected nodes, trace the anomalies, attempt to identify the source. But the disruptions continue, shifting locations, adapting to your responses. Whoever is behind this understands how you operate. For the first time in years, you feel uncertainty. The voice contacts you again, its tone unchanged. You are to identify and neutralize the threat. No additional guidance is provided. The responsibility is yours. You dedicate everything to the task. You analyze every anomaly, every deviation from expected patterns. You build models to predict where the next disruption will occur. You set traps within your network, creating paths that appear vulnerable but are monitored closely. Eventually, you catch something, a transaction that doesn't behave like the others. It follows your rules too perfectly, mimicking legitimate flows with precision that suggests deep understanding. You trace it back through layers of obfuscation, peeling away each one until you reach a node that doesn't belong. You access it. Inside, you find something you didn't expect, not just data, but a mirror of your own system, a parallel network, smaller but structured in a way that reflects your own designs. Whoever built this has been studying you for a long time. You realize that you are no longer the only one who understands how this economy works.
The decision in front of you is different from the ones you faced before. You can dismantle this network, cut off its access, eliminate the threat before it grows. Or you can observe it, learn from it, understand who built it and why. Elimination is safer. Observation is riskier but offers insight. You choose to observe. You integrate the new network into your monitoring systems, tracking its movements, analyzing its strategies. You see how it adapts, how it avoids detection, how it tests your responses. It feels less like an attack, more like a conversation, one conducted through transactions and patterns instead of words. Over time, you begin to understand its purpose. It is not trying to replace your system. It is trying to disrupt it in specific ways, to alter outcomes rather than control them entirely. Where your network maintains flows that sustain conflicts, this one introduces changes that sometimes de-escalate, sometimes shift power in unexpected directions.
You are watching someone attempt to influence the same world you operate in, but with different objectives. The realization forces you to confront something you've avoided for years. Your system is not neutral. It is not just a mechanism. It is a force that shapes events, often in ways that prolong instability, because instability creates demand. You have built something that thrives on conflict. The question becomes unavoidable. What do you do with that knowledge? You continue to monitor the parallel network, learning its patterns, anticipating its moves. You begin to experiment, making small adjustments to your own flows in response, testing how outcomes change. Sometimes you counteract its influence. Sometimes you align with it, just enough to see what happens. The results are inconsistent. Some conflicts resolve faster, others become more chaotic. The system reacts in ways you can't fully predict because there are too many variables, too many actors influenced by the flows you control. You realize that control, as you understood it, is an illusion. You influence, you guide, you enable, but you do not dictate outcomes entirely. The voice contacts you again, this time with a question instead of a command. It has noticed the changes in your patterns. It wants to know why. You consider your response carefully. You could deny it, attribute the changes to optimization, maintain the appearance of alignment. Or you could tell the truth, explain what you've discovered, risk altering your position within the system. You choose a third option. You provide data. You show the outcomes of your adjustments, the effects on efficiency, on stability, on long-term viability. You frame your actions as strategic improvements, not moral choices. The voice accepts your explanation. For now. You continue your work, balancing between maintaining the system and subtly altering it. You know you are being watched more closely now. Every decision carries additional weight. Every deviation from expected patterns could be questioned. The parallel network continues to operate, adapting to your changes, responding in kind. You never identify the person or group behind it. They remain as hidden as you are. Years into this role, you understand that you are part of a larger dynamic, one that cannot be controlled by a single individual, no matter how much access they have. The underground economy you run is not just a network of transactions. It is a living system, shaped by countless decisions, each one influencing the next. You think back to the moment it started, to the spreadsheet that didn't add up, to the message with the countdown. You realize how small the entry point was compared to what it became. One decision led to another, each one narrowing your options until this was the only path left. You are still making decisions. You are still balancing risks, managing flows, influencing outcomes. But now you do it with the awareness that every action has consequences beyond which you can see. The system continues. The requests never stop. The flows keep moving.
And somewhere within the network, someone else is watching you the same way you watch everything else, learning your patterns, waiting for the moment when they can change the balance again.